Hey everyone, hope you're having a blessed evening. Let me come to you with some scriptures that might blow your mind and go against most of the teachings and the beliefs that you may be hearing in many of your church services and assemblies. Okay? Listen, people, we must understand the scriptures by in context. There's the immediate context, then there's the context of the entire of the chapter, then there's the context of the entire scriptures. Okay, such as here with the gifts of tongues, because this is a big subject. Some will say that it is not one of the essential teachings or beliefs, and it's not. But a lot of people today make it essential because they will base it as a sign of your salvation, or that you are not getting the fullness of the Christian walk because you have not spoken tongues. And they're the tongues that most are talking about are not even the biblical tongues. They have created this different category that the Bible knows nothing about. Okay, and one of the things you hear them say is tongues are for a private prayer language. Okay, never see anyone praying in a heavenly language anywhere in the scriptures. Okay, um, and they'll say that these tongues, that that's the main thing, but it's a private prayer language, so that Satan can't understand. So it's a heavenly language. Okay, it's the tongues or the languages of angels that Satan cannot understand. Who, let's remember, is a fallen angel. So if it was a heavenly language, it would be his native language, his native tongue. Okay, so that's contradictory right there. And then the false basis of needing some secret code to pray to God so Satan can interfere when God is sovereign. Satan cannot interfere in anything. We see this with Job. He had to ask permission to test Job. Okay? And all throughout the scripture, Satan or no one does anything without God's permission. Okay? With spiritual gifts, here in First Corinthians chapter 12, Paul is writing to the church in Corinth because of a misuse of these spiritual gifts. He says, I don't want you to be ignorant. Okay? Notice, leading up to this chapter, because a lot of people, they come up with their own doctrines. Okay? They'll misinterpret scriptures and neglect and forget about everything that was already said. Okay? And create their own doctrines. But right before this, right before Paul starts talking about these spiritual things, spiritual gifts, this pneumatikon is what the word is in the original Greek manuscripts, the pneumatika, which is spiritual things. Okay, he says in the previous chapter, chapter 10 and verse 24, let no one seek his own good, but that of his neighbor. Then in verse 33, he says, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of the many, so that many may be saved. There's two examples right here where Paul's saying, don't seek things for yourself. Don't. And what's the application? We don't pray for spiritual gifts that we would benefit ourselves. Okay? I don't ask or pray, say, God, give me the gift of charity. That way I can be charitable to myself. We don't ask for pray for the gift of healing. That way you'd be able to heal your own self. This is never the case. But according to so many today, that would be the exception when it comes to tongues. Well, you pray for tongues so you can edify or build yourself up. Listen, people, when Paul says one who prays in the tongue edifies himself, he's not saying that in a good way. Okay? That would be equivalent to today as if I looked at you and said, you know what? All you do is think about yourself. Well, in that same mindset, if I said that to you, so many today would say, well, let's see, he's saying we need to just think about ourselves. No, no, ma'am, no, sir. He was not saying that in a good way. He was saying that in a rebuking way, because everyone should have the understanding that we are to do nothing out of selfish reasons. Okay? So when he says you're edifying yourself, that should automatically dawn that, oh, well, this ain't a good thing, because if I'm doing it for myself, okay? But listen, when he says, go to verse 12, and he says, it's the Spirit. In verse 11, he said, the Spirit distributes to each one according to his will, not your will, not my will. It's not according to how badly you want it or how much it's according to God's will, whom he gives, what he gives, according to his purposes. Okay? It says, each one is given in verse 7 of chapter 12, 1 Corinthians, but each one is given the manifestation of the Spirit. What for, Paul? For the common good, not for self, not so you can pray and confuse Satan, or confuse the enemy, not so you can build yourself up. It's for the common good. And before anybody can twist and say, well, I build myself up for others. No, ma'am, no, sir. We'll talk about this. So often people say, why does the scripture sometimes be so vague? Say, like with the gift of speaking about tongues and spiritual things, they'll say it's so vague. It seems like this and it seems like that. Why can't the Bible just come straight out? Why don't it just come out and say, for instance, tongues is for XYZ, instead of being vague? Okay, well, here is one of the times where the Bible is completely unambiguous. It is not vague at all. Okay, in chapter 14, okay, verse 22, so then, tongues are for, hold now, we're getting ready to tell us exactly what the purpose of tongues is. Is it going to be multiple things? Is Paul getting ready to say tongues are for private prayer, for building yourself up, for confusing the enemy, and all of these different things? No, let's see what he says. So then, tongues are for a sign, not to those who believe, but to unbelievers. Wow. But yet, I mean, it's as clear as can be. But prophecy is for a sign, not to unbelievers, but to those who believe. So the list ends right there. Tongues are for a sign to unbelievers. A sign to unbelievers. Not so people sitting in the congregation among believers can seem more spiritual than the other person. Okay? It's not for your private prayer so that you can confuse the enemy or build yourself up or any of these type of things. He says that it's for a sign to unbelievers. The purpose of the gift of tongues or the gift of languages is for unbelievers. Not for self, but it's for unbelievers. And say, well, how would that be played out? Well, we see it in Acts on the day of Pentecost. For unbelievers, they spoke and they said, how is it we hear each one in our own tongue, our own language, hearing them speak of the mighty deeds of God? Okay? All these different languages, foreign languages, okay? Unknown languages. Why does it say unknown language? It doesn't mean unknown to every single person. And out of this world language. It's unknown previously to the speaker. For instance, I do not know Mandarin. So if God was to bestow me with the gift of languages, the gift of tongues, I would be able to miraculously speak Mandarin among unbelieving people who also speak Mandarin, that they would understand the gospel. This is the purpose of tongues. Okay? If there's any debate, we can go to the scriptures. Not, well, my opinion. God has an answer for every opinion, and just as we see right here, he tells us exactly what the gift is for. So people, let's get this straight. And I've become one, I'm not, at one point, I would say I was in more cessationist that the gifts have ceased. I'm going to lean more towards this now. I'm not going to go as far as say that all gifts have ceased. Although I believe that there were specific purposes for different gifts that were given during the foundation of the church. But I will say, okay, if the gifts are still going, then they need to match up with the gifts we see in the scriptures. No alterations, no variance. If it's going to be prophecy as far as foretelling, It needs to be as it is done in the scripture. 100% correct, 100% reliable. There's no uh-ohs. There's no oops, nothing. Because God says, way back in the Old Testament, it says, how do you know a false prophet? When they get the prophecy wrong. Okay? So there's no do-overs. There's no do-overs. If we're going to have the gift of healing, it doesn't need to say, oh, well, I feel like I had a little bit of pain in my back, and brother such and such laid his hands on me. Now that pain don't feel like it's there no more. But then when they get home in a few hours, then my back's hurting again. But lo and behold, I was healed there for a moment. No. This is healing like it was in the scripture. When the man who sat at the gate called Beautiful, who was lame from birth, okay, and he got up, something he had not done in his entire life, he got up and he walked. And not just walked, he jumped. Okay, this is the biblical gift of healing. Okay, if it's going to be the gift of tongues, it needs to be like it was in the scriptures. When it's around a bunch of unbelievers who speak a different language, okay, but then miraculously they are understanding the gospel that you're sharing with them, okay, because this is what they are for. We can do a separate thing about what Paul is actually talking about in Corinthians, where he's rebuking, and anyone who spends any time in Bible study should understand that the letter to the church in Corinth was a rebuke, a letter of rebuke for error. He's calling out their error. And anyone who knows the style of Paul's writing and his personality as it is revealed through the scriptures knows that he is sarcastic at times. He uses hyperbole and simile, such as when we would say today, oh, I seen a man the other day and he was as big as a house. That doesn't mean there was a man who was actually as big as a literal house. That's what Paul does when he says, if I speak with the tongue of men and the tongues of angels. It's not saying that you can speak with the tongues of angels, okay, or the angels speak some other kind of language. He's saying no matter whether it comes from a man's mouth or if it came from an angel's mouth. And, people, we have to be not deceived, be not led astray. Everyone's seeking these miraculous things, and they're missing the really true miraculous things that God is doing in each and every person's life of the true believer. Okay, regenerating an unbeliever, being born again, the miracle of going from unbelief to true belief. Okay, truly seeking after God from the heart, something that God says no one does. This is miraculous. But these things are being downplayed. Salvation, how wonderful and miraculous salvation is. Okay? But I hope this helps. Any questions, please feel free to leave them. Drop a comment, anything. All right? Hope you each have a blessed day. God bless.